There we go. Well, welcome everybody to Outlaws to Advocates. Today's a landmark episode for us. We're usually in the reentry, recovery, substance use, just got out of prison space. But today we have an unbelievably awesome guest. We have the United States Assistant Secretary of Labor, Mr. James Rodriguez on. My name's George Nolan. I am an advocate. I used to be an outlaw. That's in the name. I'm also a Marine veteran, and I've also been to prison, and I've also struggled with substance use. And today I get to advocate for those who are looking to make changes. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Jesse Messer. Jesse, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jesse Messer, and like George, I've spent a lot of my years of my life incarcerated. I now am a peer and recovery support specialist. I actually teach peer support certification at a facility called New Freedom. I am also a co-founder of this podcast, Outlaws to Advocates, and I am a recovery and reentry advocate as well.
Awesome. What about you, Jeremy? Who are you?
My name is Jeremy Shaw. I'm the Director of Justice Integration for integrated behavioral health clinic called Sanctuary Recovery Centers here in Phoenix, Arizona. We are creating reentry programs for those that have been justice served in any form of fashion, whether it's probation, parole, pre-trial, county jail, any type of individual that just is looking to create that opportunity to reenter society the best way they can possibly. I also peer support certified. Again, just here to listen and have a good time.
Awesome. So we got the boring stuff out of the way. Mr. Secretary, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hey, thanks for the opportunity to come on and join this conversation. George, it was a pleasure to meet you when I met you early in the, I think it was, it's interesting because I think it was April of this year. I was going to say the spring, but there was not spring when I met you in Arizona. It was about 112 degrees.
Yeah, we don't have spring here.
But good to see you again, my friend. And yeah, I'm a retired Marine. I spent 21 years on active duty in the Marine. Retired in 2009, and I've been in and out of the corporate sector and government space. Two of my political appointments. This is my second one. My first political appointment, I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Office of Warrior Care Policy for about 3 years. And the reason that's significant is because when I retired as a company first sergeant, I retired from Marine Corps Wounded Warrior Battalion West out in California. And I actually had the Balboa Naval Medical Center detachment, had about, I think about 100, a little over 100 Marines and Navy corpsmen who were injured or ill because of the wars on terrorism. And I got to work and build that program without a lot of resources, to be honest with you, at the time, because it was still brand new and significant to supporting the transitioning service members who were wounded or injured, which have a lot more difficulties in many cases than someone who didn't get wounded or became ill or injured because of the deployments. That said, if I did that, and I actually retired from there in 2009, and then being able to fast forward a little over 5 years and get to do that for the entire Department of Defense, supporting not just the Marine Corps, but all of the services, wounded, ill, and injured programs was really a career defining moment for me when I retired from the Marine Corps. And then, of course, coming back here as the Assistant Secretary in 2021 until now, and getting able to support my fellow vets in all capacities has been another highlight of my career. So I've been very fortunate post-retirement from the Marine Corps.
That's awesome, but it doesn't sound anything like retirement to me.
I'm failing miserably, I tell you that. I should say my first retirement.
That's awesome. We, as a justice impacted veteran, someone who's benefited from the programming that you're overseeing. That's how we met with Turn a New Leaf here. From the bottom of my heart, I say thank you. Those programs had a huge impact on my life and continue to have a huge impact on my life. And I know sometimes it can be hard to see from assuming what could be considered an elevated position like yours, but boots on the ground, it's having an impact. It's working, and it's not just me. There's plenty of other veterans I've met that are benefiting from your work as well. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that. And I've said this in numerous venues. Leadership is not done behind a desk. You have to be the one that gets out there and meets people like you have those conversations, those intimate conversations in those small settings like we did in Arizona, but also having large conversations with organizations who are part of this community. You know, the big organizations like Veterans of Foreign Wars, American Legion, Saved American Veterans. I mean, I could go on, but having those broader conversations with people who are supporting the community across the entire country and around the world, to be quite frank, you have to have all of those conversations consistently so everybody comes together with a singular focus on supporting that veteran, whether it was a veteran who was formerly incarcerated or someone who's just transitioned out of the military. To me, I've always said this, and my team's heard me say this numerous times. All I care about is we're supporting that veteran. We don't ask anything else except for how can we support that veteran, and that's all that matters.
Well,
Absolutely.
well said.
Jesse, do you have something, Jess?
I was just telling him, well said, man. That was great. Absolutely.
Very well spoken.
Jesse, I thought you had a question.
I do, brother. So the first question I've got for you, Secretary, and thank you for your service, is that you've dedicated your career to helping veterans transition into meaningful employment. What's one story that keeps you going on your tough days?
Oh man, I wish I could have just one story, right? Because again, I've been fortunate to have interactions with, you know, numerous veterans from all walks of life with very similar experiences as mine. I mean, I've to be quite frank, before I came to this administration and I was doing my initial Senate confirmation hearing, I never really talked about my personal journey and how I wind up in the Marine Corps and things that have happened post that. And then I realized, as I said this recently, I said, you have the power of the microphone, use it. And so I've taken that to heart. So I did that in my Senate confirmation hearing. I talked a little bit about my personal journey and this growing up in very, very modest means. I'll just frame it that way. When I was a young kid in a small town in Texas, and the struggles I had as a young kid, and then the Marine Corps helped me on the right path. And it was a perfect option for me out of my situation. And that resonates with a lot of people who've joined the military, right? Officer and enlisted alike. And when I go around and I speak to someone who was formerly incarcerated, because I've spoken to formerly incarcerated veterans who've been homeless for 15 years in some cases, or shorter, veterans who were addicted to narcotics or alcohol or whatever it is, things like that. And then to see how impactful our programs are in changing their lives for the better, I can give you numerous stories. And so one in particular was one of my very first interactions. I'll just use that one. When I first came to office, I was in Washington, D.C., and this was like coming out of COVID. And I said, I need to get out and see the veterans. I need to get out and speak to our team. And everybody was still in restrictions. And so we were kind of limited. But then, fortunately, my team connected me with an organization that we were supporting in Southside Washington, D.C. And it was a Department of Veterans Affairs were working very closely with us to get veterans housed, and we were working very closely with them to get them employed. And I went there and I was speaking to this young, let me phrase that, he wasn't a young Navy veteran, but he was a veteran, but he had just been in housing for about a week. And I was talking to him, and I said, how long were you homeless? You don't mind me asking. And he's like, 15 years. And I said, 15 years, wow. And he goes, and truthfully, he goes, I always knew I had the resources because the veterans, the VA people would come around, and he lived under a bridge in Washington, D.C. And he goes, you know, everybody drives across that bridge every day on the way to work, because I lived under that bridge for 15 years because of things that happened to him after military service. And he goes, and I just wasn't never ready to ask for help. But I always had that individual's card in my pocket. And so he goes, one day I woke up and I decided to call him. They came to pick me up. Here I am, I'm housed, I have food, I have healthcare, and I've got a job. And so for me, that was a very first view into how our agency can make an impact on the veterans' lives, that one story. And so from that story on, for the rest of my time in the agency, I got to hear a lot more stories similar, and that just reinforced why we exist as an agency, and it reinforced our mission, but at the same time, it reinforced why I was in this role to do this job with the team that I get to work with every day.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And I know Jesse and Jeremy didn't have the pleasure of meeting you like I did, but you talk about like just a down to earth human experience, right? Well, when someone's coming from DC, from an appointed position in the government, I kind of just discounted off the rip, if I'm being completely honest. And we spent a lot of time together that day. We had some real conversations, and I had a really great first impression of you. When you mentioned the podcast, I was like, okay, but I kind of took it with a grain of salt, and I'm just being honest here. Yeah. And the follow-up by you and your team has shown 100% that you walk that walk, right? The message you have is backed up by action. And the conversation we get to have, the fact that you showed up today, you called me last week just to have a conversation about today, which shows just that hands-on approach, right? And that's something we get from the veteran community. Leading behind a desk, that kind of stuff doesn't really work. We got to be in the trenches. We got to be getting dirty and having those conversations. So again, man, thank you so much for your work, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think for those who don't know, I called George. I was actually out walking my dog, and I was listening to podcasts, which I usually do. I'm out walking my dog, and I'm listening to podcasts all the time. And I was listening to the Outlaws and Advocates podcast. And there was something that struck me in the conversation. And it was about the last conversation, the last person you had on. He was talking about how marathon running, ultra marathon running was a way for him to really help with his previous addictions, and then how it helped him with his transition and all those type of things that he was working through. And someone who has been a runner all my life, that was something that I still do as a retiree. And then in my role, I run, I walk, do things like that, because that's where I get my mental strength from, right? I get out and I walk and do running like that. So that resonated with me. But then just the conversations alone that you have with people in your podcast, I listened to quite a few of them already, and they're truthful and they're raw, right? And I think that's what people forget about in these days. We need to have these type of raw conversations and not worry about judgment. We have to have these conversations about why things are a challenge, or why someone is struggling. And I think that resonates with the veteran community. The veteran community writ large, right? There's a lot of struggles when someone transitions out of the military, but oftentimes it's not recognized. We think everybody has a smooth transition, and that's not always the case. And so we have to be able to have those hard conversations. And that's what I try to do.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I'm pretty sure Jeremy had something for you.
Yeah, I had the privilege also too, back in the development of the Second Chance Center. George, Jesse, and myself are all products of this reentry program that the Department of Corrections had created. And I had the privilege of, once we started branching out to look for resources, had the privilege of meeting G7 Peer Support, and how they're able to literally come in and shift their focus on the veterans that we currently had in that program, talking about all the different things that were implemented as far as their veteran assistance. And coming out of incarceration, it's truly, truly important. The closest thing I ever had to military while was the tour we would do, and you want to talk about uncomfortable. Anything that we would put together in there was pretty like any type of veteran workouts that we had put together was pretty strenuous. I would say, what was the most unexpected or creative skill you've seen as a veteran bring into the workforce? Like, did someone ever say, I'm really good at assembling tanks. Can I work in operations?
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's part of the transition narrative that we try to really get veterans to utilize more effectively. Right? And I think the biggest challenges that veterans have is the ability to articulate their skill sets and how that translates into the job that they want to obtain, right? And so a lot of the enlisted veterans have this challenge. And it's one of the things that we've tried to focus on when they're transitioning out of the military and they're taking their classes, and then at the same time after they've transitioned out. So we have numerous programs that really help them try to create a narrative that helps them articulate their skills, their background, so the veteran or the employer understands that. Right? I've got numerous stories. You mentioned tanks. Of a friend of mine who I hired when I was in the defense and aerospace industry was an actual tank driver. He got injured in the war, and he was like, I have no idea what kind of job I'm going to get. But we understood that he was an operational manager at the same time. He knew how to manage risk. He knew how to execute operations, how to do planning, how to do all these strategic thinking, as well as being a problem solver, right? And so we got him hired in our electronic systems business up in Nashville, New Hampshire, and he's succeeded exceptionally well out there because we were defense and aerospace. But he would have never thought about going into defense and aerospace because, to his point, he was just an enlisted guy and he was a tank driver, right? He had so many other skills, he didn't know how to articulate those. So we worked with him to ensure that he could explain that to the hiring manager. But we also explained to the hiring manager what his skills were. So that way there was a conversation being had there, not just someone talking to the other person, right? And then I had another conversation that I use this analogy quite a bit. A Army sniper that same thing. I hear this all the time. Like, well, I was a sniper in the Army. What skill sets do I have that can be utilized in the corporate space? But there's a ton of skill sets that you have. You just have to be able to understand how to take each one of those skill sets and put pen to paper so that way you can articulate that. So now this Army sniper, I use this story a lot. But I think it's important. This Army sniper, we put him into an engineering with no college degree, into an engineering department, working on weapon systems. Fast forward 4 years, no college degree, and he's a patent holder on 3 systems that the company is utilizing to this day, right? Because of his lived experience from the wars, and then he brought that into the company, put his skill sets to work, and developed 3 patents. And so, and I could go on again with multiple stories, but that's really the challenge that veterans struggle with overall, and get the corporations to understand how they can. One of the things in the business that I tell corporate leaders often is I don't use all the same analogies that everybody always does, right? All the soft skills that veterans have, leadership, on time, things like that. We know that that's a given. Right? What I do bring to the table is telling them how it's good for their business. If you hire a veteran, all the data shows that your business is going to be better off because veterans perform at a higher rate than non-veteran peers. Veterans get promoted faster than their non-veteran peers. Veterans stay in the company longer than their non-veteran peers. And we know in today's day and age, that is something that's uncommon, right?
Yeah.
But if there's a culture fit for that veteran, they're going to perform exceptionally well and they're going to be loyal to your organization. But we have to get them into the right fit and the right level of entry into an organization, regardless of what the industry is. We got to get them into the right level.
Absolutely. And like a common theme that comes up in our podcast, right? Whether we're talking about veterans, we're talking about reentry, we're talking about human beings. In order for us to be successful and to move through life, resilience has to be a part of that. It has to be woven in, right? Just like trauma is woven into all our paths at some point or another, even though a lot of us don't choose the trauma we get, we've all experienced it. And the resilience that we get to see in that correlation between veterans and people coming out of prison, and in my case, both, right? That reentry space is the same. I've experienced both those reentries. I've come home from the Marines, and I've come home from prison. And both of those times, I put myself in my own little box. I got out of the Marines. I knew how to work some analog radios and so run some wire. I discounted it. I have to be a construction worker, this, that, and the other. And not knowing our value and having people like the people that are in this podcast to be able to advocate for you, to be able to show you your value, to be able to identify those blind spots for us is extremely empowering. Because now, I didn't even see that. Like you used the veterans analysis. I'm going to use one that we use a lot in a reentry space. If you're selling drugs, right? Was that all a waste of time? Was that all poison to the community? 85% of it was, but you learned some form of marketing. You learned some form of, sales, like these skills can be transferable. And the one thing that really stands out to me is how hard we have to work to stay in our addictions, right? Or to stay in that negative mindset. I have to laser focus on why I'm failing, because I'm this, because I'm that. If we are able to change that focus to, hey, I can move forward, I can do this, nothing's going to stop me. It's an unbelievable, the world opens up. Just we talked about the veterans, they're nonstop. They push through all obstacles and get the mission done. They're mission focused from the start. It's such an awesome space to be in and to have people like you who advocate for people like us. And I'm extremely grateful for that. So let me ask you this, if you don't mind, sir.
Sure.
What advice would you give to a veteran just released, just stepped into the workforce and feels like he's maybe not qualified or maybe way out of his depth?
I tell you, Oh, sorry. Go ahead, George. Finish your
No, I was just saying, what advice would that look like for you?
A lot of veterans get, and this is people in general, but you hear this from a lot of veterans. A lot of veterans get what's called imposter syndrome. We've all heard that, right? Imposter syndrome. I don't feel like I have the skills to do this. I shouldn't be here. I'm not that type of person. I don't believe in it. I believe if I put in the work and I am doing everything I possibly can to get in the role that I am in, then I deserve to be here, just like the person sitting next to me.
Absolutely.
And I've always told everybody that, right? To your point, nothing is easy. But if you're putting in all the work, you're the one who's going through rehabilitation. You're the one who's staying sober. In this case, for veterans, you're the one who served in the military, and now you're transitioning out, and you're continuing to get education. You're using the skills that you had in the military, and you land a great job. Why should you feel bad about that? Why should you feel like you don't deserve to be there, right? That's not Rodriguez's personality. Now, I'm saying that with a sense of humility, right? Because I know it takes a lot of work. But at the same time, I don't want people to feel like they don't deserve to be there because they put in the work. They've done the continuous, or they did the service that nobody else oftentimes does, right? They've worn a uniform, raised their right hand, said, I want to serve and defend my country. But it does become a challenge because oftentimes, one of the challenges that veterans face is that when they are seeking employment and they don't get the job, they don't know why in many cases. So they don't understand what I did or did not do right to not get that job, right? I don't know if I explained that correctly.
No, absolutely.
You apply for jobs, right? And you think you've got this great resume, you've done a great job of aligning your skill sets to whatever role it is you apply to, and you don't get an answer. Or you don't even know if you got the job. You don't hear from anybody, or you get a rejection, and there's no reason why you are getting rejected, right? You're not getting that explanation. And so that in itself mentally is challenging for a lot of veterans when they transition out of the military because they're looking for that job and they feel like they're a good fit. So what often happens is that employers don't understand that because they don't understand the veteran mentality, right? In the military, when you do something wrong, it's quick, usually a corrective action that allows you to understand what you did wrong and you move on, right? That's usually what happens. And so when you get out of the military, that's not what always happens. And so you apply for a job, you get a rejection, or you don't get a rejection. You just don't hear from them in many cases. You don't know what you did right or what you did wrong. So how do you go on to the next opportunity, right? And how do you keep doing that over and over when that consistently happens? And so what I try to do is get employers to understand that. Just tell them that they didn't have the skill sets to this job, but maybe there's another opportunity in that company for them. And so looking at how you can best fit them into an organization really matters. There's this saying that I use when I talk about why people leave organizations. It's people leave managers, they don't leave organizations.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times that's because there's a lack of education on the manager's part with regards to how they can incorporate that veteran into their workplace, and vice versa, how the veteran can incorporate themselves into that workplace. And so there's always a struggle there. But many times people go to an organization because they believe in the mission, the vision, and those type of things. And that's why they go to a company. But oftentimes they leave the manager who is not able to help them build their career in that organization. So all of that to say that if you are telling the veteran why they are not getting a specific role, that is very helpful. They're not going to be mad about it. They want to understand it. How can they better prepare themselves for the next opportunity? And so we need to continue how to refine that process, if you will. I mean, I'll be truthful with you. I mean, there's jobs where I've been turned down for, and you would think, everybody tells you, when you leave, you come in as a political appointment, you're going to be assistant secretary. Everybody wants to hire you, right? That's not the case. It doesn't always happen that way, right? And so there's a lot of people who will tell you, I want to hire you. I want to do, I want you to come work for us. And then when the opportunity, when you need that opportunity, it doesn't always exist, right?
Absolutely.
And so if I'm feeling that struggle, well, guess what? I know a lot of people who don't have the opportunities that I've had are even in a more precarious situation because they don't have the opportunity to have conversation with corporate leaders like I do, right? And so that's why that to me is so important that we get the veterans understanding articulate their value, but at the same time work with the corporate leaders so they understand the value that these veterans bring to the workplace.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I really like what you're saying, that language and culture of the organization it has to like really set a really good, standard, like even have like their own standard of operating procedures when onboarding a veteran. Because I would, if I put myself kind of like in your position, I would think I would also approach this from a level of safety. Like if I walk into a culture that doesn't feel very safe, like the first thing I want to do is like not engage. Right. I mean, you guys spent years, protecting our freedom. Safety is important. So having a good culture set in place, and like you said, an educated manager, that would make all the world of difference for a veteran to transition into the workplace.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think looking from an incarcerated veteran standpoint, right, finding the right type of job. I'm sure there's a lot of discrimination that occurs, right, when someone finds out that someone's been incarcerated, right? They're not going to give them these higher paying jobs potentially right up front, right? They're not going to, even though they may have had college degrees that they obtained while they're in incarceration. But the fact is that some people can't overlook that. Truth be said, the same thing happens sometimes with veterans, is that because of their service, sometimes they're not getting, in some cases, right, senior roles. And so that's just a culture thing, and that's an educational opportunity for us. So that's what I always try to do, is figure out how we can educate all the masses to ensure that we have a successful conversation and why someone is looking for employment in specific industries.
That's a good way to look at it, Mr. Secretary. So I actually work in the vocational department for a facility called New Freedom, and we deal with a lot of people coming out of prison, and a lot of those people are veterans. And one of the biggest hurdles and obstacles that I see is a lot of times people that have made mistakes in their life have trouble believing that they're worthy, or that they deserve a job, or that they deserve a second chance. And a lot of these people have skill sets, but even dealing with a lot of these employers aren't even looking for skills. I mean, they're willing to train. What they're looking for is somebody that can be responsible, somebody that can show up to work, somebody that can pass a drug test, and somebody that's willing to learn. And those are skills that veterans bring to the table. And the thing is it's a lot of times it's with these people getting out, it's helping them learn that just because they made a mistake in their life, that doesn't define them. And a lot of times what I've found is helping them overcome the stigma that they put on themselves for making mistakes can be even more difficult than actually finding them a job. We can find them a job. If somebody will give them a chance, it's getting them to believe that they deserve it, because they do. And I think that's a lot of the hurdles that I struggle with where I'm at. But one of the questions that I've got for you, and we've been touching on this a lot, I mean, how do you inspire these employers to see the value in hiring veterans? I mean, we've kind of been touching on that a little bit, but how do you break through barriers if you see that there are some?
Yeah, oftentimes I'm a big data guy.
Yeah.
And so my team gives me a lot of data consistently. And I think data really proves the point to people without you having to go explain to everybody, that it's good for business, right? I can take all the data and show them why it's good for business. Some of the things I mentioned earlier, right? That, the business is going to be better, well-positioned financially if they have more veterans in their industries. And at the same time, the skill sets that veterans bring based off of the taxpayer investment. So think about this. When you go into the military, taxpayers are investing in you, right? You're getting professional development. Somebody, in my case, did 21 years. There was a lot of investment from the taxpayer in my overall professional development. I don't know if they got their money's worth, but I'm hoping they did, right? But, but so you think about it this way, right? At 4 years or 20 years, you're getting a lot of investment in that individual, right? And so then on top of that, they're getting education, or they're getting education after they separate from the military. You're more likely to have a college degree if you served in the military. You're more likely to have an advanced degree if you served in the military than our non-veteran peers, right? And so you take those skill sets and you bring them into a business. It's a good business decision. So then you take all those other soft skills that everybody highlights. You take all of that and you roll up into one. It's good for business. I mean, we've got a good unemployment rate for the last 4 years. It's been on average about 2.8% unemployment rate for the veteran community compared to our non-veteran peers, which is about 3.8%. Every demographic of veterans outperforms our non-veteran peers. One of the areas we have to work on is our veterans who are disabled vets. They've got a higher unemployment rate. We have to work on that population still, and getting corporations to work with the disabled veteran community. And so we work with some partners, Disabled American Veterans, Paralyzed Veterans of America, to really try to help advocate for those veterans. And then we created programs to support that transition for people who have injuries or illness due to military service and people who've been out in the military. So I think it's inherently important to ensure that we talk to them about the skills that the service member brings into the workplace, right? Every skill set. I was speaking at a conference about cybersecurity, for example, and I said, look, if you go and you look at the Army cyber program, for example, when someone goes into the Army, by the time they leave in the Army, if they did 4 years or 20 years, they're going to have numerous cyber certifications and training that the taxpayer paid for, right? And that they did while they're in the military, in many cases, they were defending the nation's grid or the military from cyber attacks, those type of things. Although they may not have a college degree, but then they get out of the military and then they get a college degree in cyber, and then they come and work for you. Why would you not see that individual as a valuable asset to your organization, right? So oftentimes employers understand what type of investment is made in those individuals when they join the military and how those military occupational skill sets can translate into supporting that organization, right? I get often asked all the time, hey, what did you do in the military? Because people always want to know how I wound up in this job. And I said, I had 5 MOSs, I think I was in the Marine Corps. And on top of that, there was some that I was not even certified to be an MOS, because like anybody's ever worn a uniform, you don't just do one job. You're doing many, many other jobs, right? And because that's what's required at the time. I mean, I worked on generators for one time because I was going on deployment and we didn't have somebody that could work on a generator. And they sent me as a young Marine to go figure out how to work on generators. Right? I mean, that's because what they needed at the time. Yeah. And so, but to talk about all those type of things and how they're valuable to an employer, because those are things that you don't learn in a 4-year institution.
No.
Right. And so taking those type of skill sets and then you add formal education to them when you can, you've got a great opportunity to have a good business asset.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a really great focus, especially like for those that are incarcerated. Like recently, I had a friend that communicated with me that he worked special projects, while incarcerated. For the last 5 years, he was welding. He got out. He went to the union. They hired him at $22 an hour. He took a welding test. He jumped up to 50. Right, those transitional skills, whether it's from the military or whether it's incarcerated, I think like having those pre-investment opportunities where these employers can really look at the whole scope of what's transferable and what's not, where they can utilize them. I really like the language you're using in regards to how valuable of an asset, if they don't work in this area, they can work in that area, right? But it also, like you said, to double down on the management, that requires really good leadership, right? And as you know, we do, if you've listened to our podcast, we do talk about vulnerable stuff, right? So as a leader, 21 years, and thank you for your service. You've probably had your share of big wins and setbacks. So my question for you, sir, is what is one mistake that you've, without a doubt, been so grateful you had made because it taught you something so important? What is it? And if you could elaborate on it, we would gratefully love to hear it.
Great question.
I'm not sure there's enough time to talk about all that stuff. But I think that one thing that I like what you said, Jamie, is that what you've learned from that mistake, right? And I think that's really the crux of this whole conversation, is that we all make mistakes. We're all human, right? But how do we learn from those mistakes? How do we educate ourselves and prepare ourselves for continued success? One of the things I'll tell you in this role, what I've learned oftentimes is that how do you articulate your vision to a team is going to support the mission, right? And then everybody else who has a stake in what you do as an agency, and I'm talking about everybody in federal government, all of our VS, veteran support organizations, military support organizations, our veterans themselves. How do we get everybody to really understand your vision, and how do you do that successfully? Because that can really help move the needle a lot faster on a lot of priorities and policies, right? And in this role, I think it was a bit of a challenge because of the fact we were coming out of COVID. And so when we tried to set the vision and mission for this organization, it took a little while for that to take hold because of the fact that we were so dispersed, right? We weren't coming into the office, we weren't in person. We were doing all of these things most of the time. And so that took a little while. But what it did teach me was how to be more thoughtful in the conversations I was having with people who had an investment in what I was trying to achieve as an agency leader, right? Going out to meet people where they are, going out in person to have smaller conversations. I mean, I'm the type of person, if it's one veteran who wants to meet with me, I'll meet with him or her any day, anytime. I'll call them, whatever it is, or I'll go to speak to the large audience. To me, it doesn't matter. And so when I looked at how do we operate as an agency, I was pretty simple in my view on how we can really support the agency. And I'd set out 3 priorities. I mean, the first one was getting the transition right. Now it's a little bit longer stick to that, but for the sake of time, it's just getting the transition right, helping those veterans who are transitioning out of the military to understand the programs we have that can support them. 2, getting resources to underserved communities. Now, I said underserved communities, I'm talking about everybody. That's incarcerated veterans, homeless veterans, people of color, women veterans, right? Veterans in rural communities. I mean, that could go on and on. Where oftentimes we haven't paid a lot of focus onto those veterans. To go back to what I said before, I don't care if that veterans in Arizona, in North Dakota, Texas, all I care is that person is a veteran. And how do we get resources to him or her? That's what mattered to me. And then how do we continue to move forward as an agency? So this goes back to the vision piece of that, right? Is how do I get everybody to understand and buy into that vision? It takes a lot of work. In the future, I'll understand. Now what I've learned is to do that more succinctly and do it earlier in a specific way. And I think that's what's going to help me in the future. But what I hope is really set a foundation for this agency going forward is that now we've made a lot of progress with all of our partners across the country. And those partners are going to continue to grow, and our relationships on how we support the veteran as a public-private partnership is going to continue to grow well after I'm gone. So there was something that learning did occur, and I'm glad that learning is going to lead to future success for the agency well after I'm gone.
That's awesome. And you talk about the partners, and obviously I'm biased. I have to give a shout out to Turn a New Leaf here in Arizona. I don't know if they're national or not. I just know who helped me here, and that was through Turn a New Leaf. And then Tanya Pardo, who's out of Oregon. That small, couple hour connection that we had at Turn a New Leaf, the fruits that it's bared for me personally, for the resources I've been able to give. I know Jeanette, the peer support who helped me transition, who helped me get housed, who helped me with some employment stuff, even something people might not think of a $50 gas card is that big of a deal. Well, when you get out of prison or any kind of reentry, you don't have income coming in, $50 for some gas helps if you have a car. If you don't have a car, there's some bus passes. And the partnerships that you have built are just incredible. And those community collaborators that are out here in the streets in their local communities affecting this change. It's such a phenomenal privilege to be a part of that. And all of us obviously work in the helping space. And I know firsthand with veterans what that can look like. I also know what substance use, and then the combination of them. Some of it can be heartbreaking. It can be difficult to be a part of. It can be a challenge. Working in this space where the topic, the people, the struggles can be pretty heavy.
Yeah.
How do you maintain a sense of humor? Just to even come on this podcast, obviously you have to have some sense of humor, right? How are you able to do that?
One thing I've said to the team since day one, and it's been reinforced over the last 4 years, honestly, is that we change lives. And what do I mean by that? In the sense that you may not change that person's lives today because you met him or her, right? But it might be 5 years down the road, or in that other veteran's case that I mentioned earlier on, 15 years down the road. But the fact that you had a conversation with him or her and showed them that they matter and that you're there to support them when the opportunity exists or when they want that support, that's what matters. That's what really gives you the opportunity to change someone's lives. 90+% of our staff are veterans themselves, and the other rest of 96% of our staff are veterans, right? The rest of them are supportive of our mission. They're either military spouse, they're family members, or they just believe in our mission. So they're going to do what's best for their veterans, right? Our fellow veterans. And so that is inherently important because a lot of them have transitioned out of the military. Many of them struggle too when they transition out of the military.
Yeah.
So they can bring that real-world conversation to someone when they're struggling themselves, when they're talking to them about their transition. And so we know that experience matters, right? Same thing with when you're talking to incarcerated veterans. If you've never been incarcerated and you're trying to tell someone all the things that they need to do to better themselves, I mean, they might, take it with a grain of salt, right? But if you have lived experience,
That's putting it nicely.
yeah, right. If you have lived experience, and then they're going to listen to you, right? The veterans want to do the exact same thing, and at the same time, what they want is honesty. They don't want people to tell them, "Hey, it's going to be great. Everybody's going to hire you, and life is going to be so much, better when you leave the military." Things like that. They want people to be honest with them. They want corporate leaders to be honest with them when they say that they're not going to get that role, but how to better themselves to prepare for the next role, things like that. And so taking all of that and seeing all the good that is happening within our agency with the people that I get to work with, to me is so inspiring. But you did say, how do I keep my sense of humor? I'm really not the type that cracks jokes. And out of my 21 years in the Marine Corps, I spent 6 years as a Marine Corps drill instructor. Three at the Recruit Depot in San Diego and 3 at Officer Camp School, making Marines for a living, right? And so, so that kind of gives you a little bit of my personality. But I'll tell you a joke that something that kind of really helped me understand again when I transitioned out and how it was going to affect my fellow veterans. Veterans this will resonate with veterans. I was in business, defense and aerospace. I'd been there probably about 2 years, maybe. And I was at an offsite business meeting, a lot of business leaders, and we're having dinner. And someone asked me, what was something that you thought was really kind of similar question, was really funny in the military, and I know you did a lot of cool things and just kind of in the conversation, non-military people. And I said, yeah, I'll tell you, this was really funny. I was in the jungle in Thailand, and we're all sitting around getting ready for an operation. And I was a first sergeant, me and my company commander and some of the other senior leaders were sitting with the Thai Marines, their leadership, and we're having a traditional dinner out in the field. And little unbeknownst to us is that we were actually in the direct path of artillery that was going over us. And so we're sitting there, we take our Kevlars off and we're sitting there to eat because the Thai Marines didn't have any of that stuff on. And then we get a frantic call from the Fort observers. They're like, you guys are in the firing lanes. You guys need to put your gear on. And, we're like, yeah, well, we're eating dinner. We're not going to do that. We're fine. Artillery's going way over us like that. But sure enough, right? Short round comes. Everybody scrambles. Everybody falls to the deck. The short round explodes and things like that. Everybody falls to the deck, under the table and all this stuff. And then we get back up and everybody's looking around. Everybody's fine. Everybody starts laughing, right? It's like, yeah, this is exactly what would happen, right? We'd say we're fine, and this is exactly what happened. Well, and I'm telling this story at this dinner, and everybody's looking at me like, I can't believe you guys were laughing about that. Nobody got the concept of this story except for someone who was in the military. And so that made me realize, again, that when I transition out of the military and I'm having conversations with corporate leaders, you have to have a conversation to get to understand why certain experiences shape military thinking, right? And then how you can take that thinking and put it to good use in your company. And so I don't know if that was a helpful explanation, but that was so I found some humor in that, as I thought it was humor, but someone else who was not understanding of the military culture and the community were really perplexed by the fact that we got up and we were killed by a foot round, and we were all laughing about it, we all survived, right? And so anyway, I think that's just part of the culture of serving in the military and understanding that, and that's why veterans always want to be about veterans, right? I was speaking to a phenomenal group, a nonprofit group out there of veterans who just created this culture where people could come and hang out. They learn how to weld, they learn how to build things, and you name it. And they all say, hey, I just want to be around GD 214s. I go do my daily job. I do all this stuff all the time, but I want to be around veterans at the end of the day. And so this was like this group community where they do things, they build motorcycles, and you have no skills whatsoever in building a motorcycle, but they teach you, and everybody works on it together. And then at the end of the day, they donate it in many cases, right? So there's a lot of those things happening around the country. We don't hear those type of success stories.
Right. And that's why we do stuff like this, right? We try to bring light to stuff that's overshadowed. Mr. Secretary, we're getting into our last few minutes here for the podcast. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we got a little bit of a late start, but something maybe you would want to, one message that you'd like to get across through our platform to the general public, whether it's from just you from a man point of view or you from the Assistant Secretary of Labor point of view. Where do you stand? Like, what's the message that you want to leave our audience with?
So one of the things that I'm the most proud of the fact that I get to represent 3/4 of the military community because I'm an enlisted guy. I'm a retired Marine First Sergeant. I think I said that early on. And oftentimes, a lot of enlisted people don't get these type of opportunities. And so what I really am proud of the fact that I get to represent the enlisted community. At the same time, I get to represent the military community writ large, right? With Congress, with the White House, with the community overall. And I get to show them, I hope I get to show them the fact that veterans are capable of doing any type of job given the right opportunity. But at the same time, veterans have to place themselves where those opportunities can find them. Right? We can't expect people to give us something. We have to place ourselves where the opportunities can find us. And so for me, that's inherently important for us to connect with the community. I would be remiss if I didn't say we also have to ensure we take care of our military spouses, we take care of our caregivers, people who are holding it down when we're deployed, or people who are taking care of the family when we're incarcerated, things like that, right? Because it's a good support system for us to be successful. And so our military spouses, in many cases, don't have as many resources to support their employment. And we know in this day and age, you have to have, in many cases, dual incomes. So supporting that military spouse, and 96% of them are women, right? Supporting that military spouse in their careers is inherently important for the overall family. But at the same time, children struggle, right? Think about it.
Absolutely.
A parent is deployed or a parent is incarcerated. It impacts the children, right? It impacts the whole family. So we have to ensure that we have resources to support them as well. And so that's something I've always really talked about is let's look at the resources that are needed to support the community or the family, from the community. We have to look at how we collectively support the collective of the military sphere. And so that's what I really tried to focus on and bring the resources to bear there. Partnerships have really expanded since I've been in office. We hold roundtables with industries who are looking to hire veterans. We get out and meet with corporate leaders. We get out and meet with public sector leaders because of the fact that we want them to understand the value that veterans bring to the workplace and the military spouses bring to the workplace. So hiring military spouses is inherently important to me because I made that part of my mission too. And the growth of an agency is only going to be as strong as the growth of its partners. And so we know that no federal agency can do it alone. When you look at when veterans get out, just like you are saying, when you get out of incarceration, the community resources are there to support you, right? And that's no different for the veterans. Oftentimes, the community resources are what's the first line of defense when someone transitions out of the military. So we want to make sure that they are supported, they are recognized. And then we as a federal government, in this case, come in and strengthen those partnerships to provide value to that support system to help that service member transition out, or the veteran try to find their next career, or the military spouse find their next career. So all those things are inherently important. And at the same time, paying attention to someone's mental health, because of the fact that we know it's a struggle, right? We know it's a struggle for a lot of us. And so I've always looked at how do we support our own team because of potential burnout in the jobs that they're doing to support veterans who are struggling, but also our veteran community, military spouse community. How do we really focusing on supporting that mental health is inherently important to overall success.
That's so awesome. And myself, I know my teammates here, we're incredibly grateful that you came here and spoke to us and gave us an hour of your time. From a veteran's point of view, I'm just so grateful that there's people like you doing the work, right? That know how it feels on, pretty much from all sides, and gets to do the work that serves that community. You walk the walk. I've said it a few times. I am literally blown away by how transparent of a conversation this has been, how bought in you are, how effective your mission has been to this point. I've written off all kinds of stuff just because I didn't believe in a lot of things. And people like you cause me to continue to believe in the things, that there is a path forward, that there are people out there that care, that there are people who are just doing an amazing job. And for you to take the time out and come hang out with 3 outlaws and 3 advocates, it's pretty awesome. However, we can support your mission moving forward, whether it's through a podcast, whether it's through volunteer work, whether it's through anything. Just from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you. We're a phone call away, and we're 100% on your side.
Thank
All
you,
right.
George.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you,
Joel.
sir.
Thank
Jeremy,
you all for continuing to use the power of the microphone, right? I think that's
Absolutely
important because people need to hear these conversations. And anytime, again, back at you, if there's anything that I can do to support you all, please let me know. I'll be leaving office in January just because of the administration changes. But I can tell you, there's no way I would never be doing something to support my fellow veterans and military spouse community when I leave office. So I'm going to continue to do that no matter what I do next. But these conversations are inherently important to continue. And I appreciate you all for taking the time to do that. And give me an opportunity to spend a little bit of time and get to know you all.
Absolutely. Phenomenal. Thank you, sir.
All right,
All
brother.
right.
Thank you again for your time. You guys have a great day.
All right, George.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Rodriguez.
Jeremy.
Bye, Christine.